Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Ask Every Child webinar. Happy New Year, and we're glad to have you back with us. I'm David Reed Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Miss Kendra programs. And with me is my colleague, Kendra Lubin, who is the Chief Medical Officer of the Miss Kendra programs, and who will be starting us off today with our topic, which is going to be about how trauma impacts the teacher-student relationship. Very important topic, certainly. After Dr. Lubin speaks for a while and warms us up, she and I will interact with each other around the topic, and then we will open it up later to your questions. Please put your questions and comments in the Q&A section of the Zoom interface, and we look forward to a very good and interesting seminar tonight. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Hadar, who's going to get us started.
Yeah, good afternoon. Happy New Year. So good to be with all of you again, or to meet all of you for the first time. And actually, I'm very glad to start the year with something that we in the Miss Kendra program and David and I have been talking a lot in terms of the importance of the student-teacher relationship. In fact, when we think about what's happening in the school, which is learning, of course, we think that in the core of the learning experience is the relationship between the student and the teacher. You can view it almost like a vehicle or almost a requisite or a platform where learning takes place. It is this interpersonal bond between the teacher and the student that is the hallmark of education, and educating and shaping the growing child. It shouldn't be that surprising, as basically when you think about child development, that's exactly how children learn early on in their life, by watching, in the case of a home, their parents, and it is at that relationship that all aspects of the child's development is contingent on. So having the presence of a teacher, an educator, to continue this essential learning process in preparation for life makes perfect sense, that in the heart of it will be the healthy and essential presence of this strong bond between the teacher and the student. However, we also know that trauma interferes with this relationship, because in the core of a traumatic experience, any kind of traumatic experience, by definition, is the complete disconnection from others. The core of the relationship in a toxic environment and in a traumatic moment is that the event or the perpetrator, if it is a relational trauma, it does not have a mutual relationship with the person. And the other person is no longer present because it happened. And if the other person, who can be a rescuer or somebody who come to be an ally for the harmed child, then there will be no trauma. So in its definition, in the core of the experience is the absence of other. So it makes perfect sense that cultivating this relationship between the teacher and the student builds almost like a bridge of connection that will be a conduit for healing, and it also continues to foster the resilience that the person overcame trauma or the toxic stress. All right, so let's zoom into really what this transformative relationship looks like in terms of the various roles that the teacher can hold. The teachers, in terms of the roles that they hold, have to be a caring adult who is willing to listen, someone who can bear witness to the student lived experience. It's an act of sharing of the burden that they come into the school with, being able to hold the student psychologically and emotionally with eye contact, with the presence of somebody who cares, with a simple validation of expression. That is horrible. I can understand why that will be scary. or maybe seeing the whole student. As we know that the boundary between the student pupil and the student person is very artificial. They come to school with their homework, but they also come with their lived experience. So being an educator cannot only look at one aspect of it. Should it be a growing experience for the child, for the developing child? Of course, when we look in this kind of roles, as I just detailed, and we think about the effect of trauma or toxic stress on it, it's clearly that not being the caring adult who is willing to listen highlights the disconnection and the isolation that is inherent in the traumatic experience. It actually leaves the student to carry the burden alone, which eventually crushes or depletes completely their natural resilience. It highlights the absence of a caring adult, again, replaying the original experience of not having someone there. And instead of seeing the whole student through the effect of the trauma, through the disruptive behavior, or maybe the withdrawn behavior, the teacher ends up seeing the effect of the trauma, but not the child. How the child behaves represents the trauma, not who the child is. Now let's look at the student, what kind of role they play in fostering this transformative relationship. They need to share the worries because it's part of what they bring to the school. This sharing act really lightens the heavy burden off their chest, making room for learning to take place. It allows the student to see the whole teacher. This is not just somebody who tells me what I need to know about math and about the rules, but someone who actually sees me. And most importantly, just being a child, not being someone who needs to carry the heavy burden of another adult who failed them. So if we look in those kind of roles and think about what are the effects of the trauma or the toxic stress on those particular roles that I just detailed, clearly it continues to burden them with their worries. And obviously over time, the burden becomes heavier and heavier. And it's almost kind of predictable. We almost can predict when the burden will be so heavy that the child will explode and the disruptive behavior will show. And at that point, we know already that it tends to be somewhat late in the process of change. And the child, by the effect of this, the trauma or the toxic stress on this role, basically see in the teacher another bystander, another person who is there when they're being harmed, but does nothing. And of course, as a result of it, they miss what we all cherish as adults and as children is childhood, just being a child. So when I hope highlighting those roles, it really highlights the importance of this powerful relationship. So let's kind of look a little bit and see what are the various ways that you can foster and exercise this relationship on a regular basis. Number one is keeping open conversation with the students daily about their lived experiences. And that's not unusual for our intuitive understanding of what health is in a healthy relationship. We do it every day when our loved one comes from work, when our children gather around the dinner table. We say, so how was your day? How was your work? Did anything happen today? And most of the time, nothing happens, but it fosters this idea that when something happens, there is a safe place to talk about it. And indeed, when something happens, and it is a normative experience of discussing worries and stress around the table or at school when you greet each other, then you can very simply keep the resilience on its natural level, and the child can unload the distress from the night before just by knowing somebody is interested in them. Thirdly, it empowers the student's voice by listening to their worries. Just a simple act of listen, not have any wisdom to share, just listen, just being another person who is willing to hear what has just been experienced the night before. It communicates to the child that their experience and their voice, by letting you know, is of value. And any sense of empowerment is a platform for any form of healing and growth. And lastly, really celebrating the courage to share. It is a very courageous act to be able to meet again the perpetration, even in memory and in retelling, and being able to tell somebody that's what happened to me. In the Miss Kendra program, as those of you familiar with the program and use it in your schools, you know that we do that by giving the child a red bead, put it in their palm of their hand and say to them, this is for your courage, because we know it is highly courageous act to tell somebody, I'm afraid, I'm worried. In fact, many adults don't do it regularly. So when we look at the benefits of fostering this relationship versus the detrimental effect of the trauma, it becomes very clear that this investment in this relationship is highly important about.
Hadar, you've hit your mute.
Can you just tell me where I muted myself?
About maybe 1 minute. So
Okay.
you had just talked about red beads.
Okay.
And how teachers are using red beads, and then unfortunately we muted. So.
All right. Well, that was a great example of how empowering my voice makes a difference, because if it was muted, you wouldn't know what I have to tell you. So I didn't mean for it to be an example, but it's a fantastic one, because trauma does mute the person. So the red bead is, as I said, it's a representation of the courage which is given by the teacher, and it's almost like fostering this bond, saying almost like shaking hand, having a commitment that we will continue to be in a dialogue about your life. The benefits of fostering this relationship are numerous, and I would like to highlight them in contrasting it to the detrimental effect of the trauma. So first of all, it creates a calmer class environment. And I would like to say it is a calmer school environment, opposed to the disruptive behavior that happens should those conversations will not take place. It is maintaining and restoring the natural resilience of the student. Each one of us endowed by resilience. And some people have enormous amount of resilience, some less, but all of us have enough to be able to really deal with stressors. The problem with trauma that it really erodes in this natural resilience. So having a way to foster it and maintain it, keep us below developing disruptive behavior or symptoms later on. And of course, if it's not being done, it saturates the resilience and empties it. It improves the capacity to engage in learning. That's a very simple principle. When you're not too worried or too anxious, you are able to attend better, opposed to the effect of the trauma, which reduces the concentration and leads to low performance. It improves emotional intelligence, understanding how learning and in any kind of transaction in our life, having an understanding of our emotional being is an important aspect of our growth and success, opposed to stunning the emotional growth of the child. It models the power of relationship. I will say it's a good template for life versus replaying or reenacting the trauma. And lastly, in terms of the teacher's benefit, although I would think all of those are directly benefiting the teacher, but it really improves job meaning and satisfaction. opposed to burnout and lower job performance or satisfaction because you are so burned out in managing the eruptions around you. All right, so let me stop here, David, and open the dialogue between the two of us.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I have a question for you. If you think about the role, the basic role of the teacher in school and what the boundaries of that role are, I'm sure many teachers have this experience of where does my role as a teacher end and where does the role of the parent begin? So teachers are not supposed to be parents. However, many of the functions of teaching overlap with being a parent. And it seems that from what you're talking about, witnessing, checking in, the warmth, all of these things seems to be very much weighted on roles that we would expect, behaviors we would expect from parents. So can you say a little bit about, are we saying that the teacher should become more like a parent, or that there is a distinction here and you're talking about a different way of being a teacher?
Yeah, this is an excellent question because I think that we see quite often, not only in transition from families to school or being a parent to being a teacher, a kind of compartmentalization of what is the role, and therefore this is my duty and I'll create this very rigid boundary around it or impermeable boundary around it where I will not be able to navigate in and out of it. I will say that both the parent and the teacher are both being human beings to the child. And the child just happened to be a small human being in growing phase. And I will say, therefore, that many times the parent has to be a teacher and need to be setting rules and insisting on certain order and sitting with them in the homework. And likewise, a teacher needs to be able to have those kind of nurturing and adult forward and human forward qualities that really facilitate the main mission of a teacher, which is to educate, like it will be fostering those qualities. The parent is to be actually a role model to the child, not only the parent. We know that any growing child benefits from a nurturing relationship with a teacher, with the kindergarten teacher, with their parents, with the babysitter, with the coach. So this is not a place this is the only place that actually those qualities have a central role. It's just that teachers actually spend a lot of time with our children. And as a parent, I kind of hope, and I have 2 children, when I send my children to school, I wanted the teacher to care for them actually the way I do, because that's the standard I carry that. And I think that that's probably how teachers feel about their own children when they send them to school. So there shouldn't be such a clear division. And I'll let you, I'm sure you have your own thoughts about it, but it's the kind of artificial boundary, the way I said about, the child. Okay, so there are pupils at school, there are students at school, but they don't cease to be a person at school, just because that's the one that is being exercised as the mission. Yeah.
Got it. Well, I mean, I think some of my thoughts related to this, which of course overlap a lot with what Hadar has just said, but in my observations of teachers all across the country, you can just see that every day, not just in elementary school, but in high school as well, there are thousands of moments of contact between teachers and students. And these are often very brief moments. And some of the moments that really seem to be kind of unhelpful seem to be what I would call role bound. That is, that the teacher is performing the role of the teacher accurately, well, but tightly, meaning I am the teacher, you're the student, I'm expecting you to behave in a certain way along the expected student role. I have role as a teacher and I'm going to act within my role, and we're going to have a transaction within those role system, which is fine, but doesn't seem to feel as full, as human, as loose as kind of a more intimate and probably healthier relationship. And I think that we're pretty sure that stress, burnout, either trauma from the point of view of the teacher's own life, or the stress of working in the schools all day for many years, tends to tighten the teacher's behavior around this transaction of teacher to student. And what Hadar is mentioning, and I think what many people in the field are trying to work on, it's in the word of being a whole teacher and a whole student, is to loosen that boundary just a touch into areas that are outside, just outside of the role that you're expected to play, which then creates a great deal of kind of movement and room to move that allows people to interact in a healthier way. I have a recent example about this, which is I had to go to the Social Security office about a year ago. I'm 70, and so I walked in there, and I was expecting a kind of a bureaucratic, a person on the other side who was going to be the Social Security agent, whatever. And I walked up to the desk, and there was all with the window and the whole thing. And the person looked at me, and they were the agent who was going to be dealing with me. And they looked at me and they said, hey, how are you doing? And it was just in this completely normal way. And without the kind of rush and the kind of business and the kind of, clipped thing that you get on, when you call up online and trying to get something and they're treating you a certain way by a script. I felt unscripted in that moment. And it did not interfere with my willingness to go along with the Social Security agent's authority over me in that moment. And I think that there's an issue here because as a teacher, one of the roles of the teacher is being an authority. One of the roles of being a parent is to be an authority. And there's some anxiety if I loosen the boundaries a little bit, if I step out of role just a little bit, will I be undermining my authority? And so because of the pressures of running a classroom and doing everything you have to do, this kind of stepping to the side tends to be given up, and you end up with a much more rote transactional moment between the teacher and the student that unfortunately sets the interaction up to be a trigger for a trauma schema. It's that kind of, as what Hadar said, the lack of a bridge between you and me in that moment that then sets it up for the trauma schema, which also is a set of roles that then gets applied to that interaction. And these roles are very pernicious and negative. The roles in a trauma schema are a perpetrator, a victim, a bystander who doesn't do anything, and a collaborator who's actually on the side of the perpetrator but doesn't want to participate. And when that infuses itself, it's drawn in to the interaction between the teacher and the student, where the student now treats the teacher as a perpetrator, or the teacher feels like the kid is a perpetrator, or the kid feels that the teacher is just a bystander and doesn't care about them, or is collaborating with somebody else, etc. Then things go south. And time after time, something that began in a completely neutral way falls into this trap, and then you get some kind of an enactment that harms the relationship between the student and the teacher. And then, of course, over time, that's carried forward. And then increasingly, the student-teacher relationship can take on aspects of the original neglect and maltreatment that the child went through. with the teacher enacting it unintentionally more and more as the relationship gets molded to the trauma. So I just want to finish just this one thought, which is, what does it mean then to step outside of the bounds of the nominal role you're supposed to be playing as a teacher? And we have defined that in the Ms. Kendra program as taking on the role of being a bearing witness. That's the role. So it's not being a friend, it's not being a parent, it's not being a rescuer. It's being a witness and bearing witness to the student as a human presence, just as Hadar said. It's a human thing. So not just playing the role, but being a human being. And it means basically signaling the student in that moment that you're the teacher, you have authority, they're a student, they have roles to do, but in addition, we're both here. We're both people, and I see you, I hear you, and I'm psychically holding you. And for the student to feel that is really to open that bridge between you and the student. And any moment that it succeeds in that, and I've been looking at the list of our participants, we have a whole list of experts on this on the call here today, who have done this a million times, where you succeed, and it happens when you succeed in crossing that bridge to the student. And there's something happens there that really, is outside of the bounds of what is expected. So I think these moments that occur are absolutely critical.
I think that, David, I would like to kind of pose, actually not even pose the question yet, but maybe to highlight that we know from our work in trauma that if, let's say, a member of the family unit has been traumatized, it affects the entire family, not only one particular relationship, not one particular transaction. Even if the trauma per se, the story itself, is not even known, there is this kind of reverberating effect that everybody quietly falls into. And I think that you spoke about this rigid repetition of things that eventually everybody suffers from. And that now, maybe it's the time to pose the question, that may be really pose in front of us the question, is it for the teacher-student relationship to be optimal, to be flexible, to be able to have those moments that really nourish and accelerate the growth of the student and the satisfaction from the work of the student, of the teacher? Does it, if we take the analogy of a family, is the school as a whole need to also make changes in order to allow teachers to step out of the role? Because quite often the teachers feel so burdened by the demand on them to finish the class or to finish the lesson or to keep everything. There's so many other demands on the teacher that actually it's hard to even for a moment to get out of that, because if you do not do that, there are some ramifications, maybe from the leadership, maybe from the Board of Education, maybe from the superintendent or whatever hierarchy influence that moment. And I think that we know from our experience that in order for that to be optimal, the entire school has to foster that kind of a priority.
Yeah.
The relationship between the principal and the teachers and the principal and the students is also of that nature.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine there's not one. I can't imagine that there's any teacher who did not go into teaching without some interest in doing that. And certainly in most school systems, there is a narrative all the way through of being a human being and caring for the kids. I mean, this is not this is pretty common, that kind of a thing. I guess my point, though, is that you can get yourself caught up in withdrawing from that just simply over time and the pressure and the stress, and that it's important to be able to kind of have the leadership remind people and to demonstrate that. I mean, we have at least two people here, Annie Morris from Sally B. Howard in Wilson, North Carolina, Nick Perrone from here in New Haven, both, and I've witnessed them both do this, and they're both school leaders, just reiterating, commenting, and demonstrating daily this kind of human contact with their kids and encouraging their teachers, to do that. And they just, it is just part of the, it's just part of the daily kind of thing, which I think it doesn't, I mean, we're up against some pretty hard stuff. So just doing that doesn't solve anything, but it's what you're saying. I just want to say one more thing before we go to questions, which is, a lot of teachers, when we talk about this, they go, yeah, but I don't have time for this. You're asking me, I hear what you're saying and it's important, but to show more caring, to attend, to ask the kids about their experiences, to reflect back, to be empathic and all this is like you're adding on really difficult, complex things. And I think I kind of thought that was right, but I actually don't think that that's what we're doing. Paradoxically, to be whole is actually to do less, because it's not about doing more and playing out your role of some teaching parental thing. It's actually taking a second and looking at the kid when he comes in the room, getting his eyes contact, and looking at them with just simply the kind of witnessing them and kind of beholding them, and just for a moment, and just going, and no demand, no, nothing's transacting, just I see you, and welcome, and a smile, and I see you. And that actually is what's seen in those simple moments is the rest of me. Not just the role of me, of another student walking in the room, the whole of me. And you're seeing all of me. And that actually doesn't take a lot of effort. It just takes some mindfulness to go, kids need that. And by the way, teachers need that. Yeah. All right, shall we open it up? Yeah, let's open it up to some questions from the audience. And we have a lot of really excellent teachers and administrators and other people on the webinar today. So be glad to hear our webmaster, Jillian Mattern, is going to throw us a question from the audience.
Okay. How are building relationships and managing student behaviors linked or separate?
Can you repeat the question, please? I don't think I got a question.
How are building relationships and managing student behaviors linked or separate?
Well, I think this ties into what I was just commenting on, which is what is building a relationship in relationship to managing students. There's a whole industry out there, of teaching teachers or guiding teachers and how to manage students, classroom management skills, and which are essential. Anyone who's been in a classroom for long knows you need to have classroom management skills. It's essential. So management is one part of those teachers' responsibility, and it's linked to their authority. But listen, we all know parents who maintain a strong sense of authority and yet are not rigid, are not negative, are not distant, and they have a strength to them that we look up to, and that they're responsive, and their authority is not built on some kind of a separation and hierarchy, but their authority comes from their role and their care for you. Likewise, we've all seen employers and other authorities who do an incredible job, and we have no issue with them having authority, but they're human, they're strong, they're warm, they listen, they take in, they make a decision. You have to follow what they're going to be doing, but they're whole. And I think that's what we need to be working on, which is, and all, the really excellent teachers all demonstrate this kind of integration, I think, of being able to keep a classroom calm and working, and at the same time being relaxed, being attentive, smiling, and the being relaxed is really a key signal, to be honest. And that's what creates building relationships within an authority-based relationship, a hierarchical relationship. So I think if we view those two things as separate, it's a problem. The idea is to somehow integrate these two into one. Hadar, did you have a thought about that?
I just wanted to say that actually, in order just to highlight the benefit, is that we will take a situation that where intuitively it will call for the authority and a more harsh kind of disciplinary perspective, which a child in the class is really being disruptive and is interfering with, the class. And I'm sure that the teachers in our audience today will know very much what is the cost for it in terms of disruptive the flow and making other kids being very upset, and it, derail the lesson and so forth. And actually, it is in this moment that you can see the most benefit, where instead of the discipline, where you're capable, because it's been practiced on things that are less charged on a regular basis, to come close to the kid and to say, so what got you upset? What happened? In kind of more relaxed way, the kid immediately comes down and able to communicate that, either fully or partially. But the benefit of your role as leading the entire class into order, because the child now is not disruptive, is a better investment than any kind of, which usually you need to get the kid out of the class or try to get the order back in the class. So it is not only that there is no art really, they're not contradicting each other. They actually work in concert. They can help each other. Actually, being very caring can enhance the authority.
Absolutely.
And actually, sometimes the authority allows you to have access and be caring to the child, because you're the adult and you have more authority in the environment.
Trauma is about harm. And people who are living and experiencing sequelae of their trauma assume when you walk in the room that harm may emerge. So you're hyper aroused. Your system is sensitized to potential harm. So you could be a Vietnam vet, you walk in a room, you're looking for weapons, things that are going to be harmful to you. If you've been a sexual assault survivor, you're looking for potential people that are going to be approaching you in an inappropriate way. If you have been a neglected child, you're walking in assuming you're going to be neglected. So they walk in, and I include the teacher as well, everyone's walking in with the assumption that harm is about to happen. And one of the things that these looks, this presence, the relaxation, the warm glance of a teacher communicates in that moment is, there will be no harm. And that settles people down. And if you know how to do it, and if you can learn how to do that, it just settles people down, because And that's where your authority can even come into play, which is to say, you're coming into my classroom, you will not be harmed. You won't be harmed by me, and I will make sure that you don't get harmed by other people. And not that harm never happens, obviously it does, but the communication of the intent for there to be no harm can really have a powerful, powerful effect, much better than any kind of de-escalation strategy, which you have to employ down the line after the kid has become very upset, which is much more difficult. Next question. Jillian.
How can I tell if it is my own trauma that is getting in the way?
Very good question. Well, that goes back to the idea that in order for you to be a good teacher, need to be a whole teacher. And we assume that by prevalence, a certain percentage of any school environment, professional, will have trauma history. So when you come to the school or any kind of transaction in your life, you bring in that history and get if indeed you have a role and you have a place, and that can be also in the school where a open conversation about how things, not to get necessarily to the details, this is not about therapy, but listen, this is a bad time because it's the anniversary of the loss of, or this is remind me of, and you take it off your chest as well. If that happens, you can keep some of those intrusion from our personhood into our daily transaction at work, of course, at school and with other people. And how do you know? Is the best way to know is to, when you do approach a child, and if the child said, I'm fine, or something comes and you are, or you experience something that you feel that it's actually coming from you, it's important. There is no loss in asking a child, how are you doing? And likewise, there will be no loss of asking you, how are you doing? In fact, it will be gain, because you can say, I actually don't feel that great today, and somebody else can provide the support that you're providing to the child. So I think that that's a good exercise in life in general, because trauma is very pernicious. And even if you ignore it, it will remind you that it's there. However, if it is something that is in conversation, and I'm not talking again in terms of therapy, although I would recommend that if it's too intrusive, but if it's just kind of you bringing to the school your last night too, then it's a good environment to be able to, talk to your colleagues, your coworkers, about that's a good practice for everybody, not only with the students. That really foster good relationship, and good relationship is a healer for a lot of wounds.
We know that 50% of teachers have a score of 4 or more in the ACEs scale. So, I mean, teachers are human beings, and we all have had many experiences that have been negative, and some of us have had traumatic experiences. It's not uncommon at all. So I think it requires some self-reflection on the part of the teacher. If you're going into teaching, you really should be somewhat self-aware of the major triggers for you. Knowing a little bit about your history, what triggers you, what kind of people, what kind of behaviors do you find you have a very limited response set, meaning you don't have a lot of tolerance or patience for. And to be honest, if we had teacher education that was trauma informed, there would be a course that wouldn't be therapy, but where people would sort of do some self-reflecting and have a list of all their traumatic events and a list of like the kind of behaviors that tend to trigger them, and trying to become aware of the fact that they're going to be students, doesn't matter if it's high school or elementary, that are going to trigger this reaction. That's number one. That's a big ask. But that's number one. Number two is the presence of fear. Whenever there's fear, it's likely to be coming from your own trauma. And that doesn't mean there are objective fears to be afraid of. Somebody could become violent. It's normal to be fearful in those situations. But if you find yourself interacting with a student and you're trying to discipline them and it's escalating and you feel the fear of it, that's often a signal or shame or intense shame. Those would be signals that you're bringing something from your own personal experience into it. Also, when you look back on an interaction with a student, if you feel that you overreacted, that's a signal that probably you're bringing something of your own experience into it, and you should examine that. And so that's just, again, kind of reviewing for yourself. Did I overreact there? Did I have a much bigger response than was warranted? It's probably your own toxic stress or trauma. Those are some ideas, I think.
I will add one last thing to this list is if you find yourself regularly, even when the demand is not so overwhelming, avoiding it, it will be another thing that reflects your own internal experience, which is your own trauma or your own stress, because that's actually what a traumatized person wants, is that they simultaneously want to avoid something, but they also want the relief from it.
Correct. Yes. Jillian, next question.
I am worried that if the student opens up, they will fall apart. What do I do? Thoughts?
I will say this is such a common fear that it's an excellent question to know the answer for. And it's very counterintuitive. In fact, the students, the traumatized individual, lives with the knowledge of the trauma every day, every single of the day, or most of the day, most of the moments of the day. They know what had happened. They know how they felt. And they know how horrible it was to experience it. So in fact, having somebody listen to it and hear them is going to do exactly the opposite. It's going to provide a relief. It's going to provide a lifting. It's going to provide a validation and assurance that what they experienced truly was wrong and truly was too much to bear. And here is another person who is providing me this evidence. And in fact, now I feel a little bit better. So it's completely counterintuitive, and they're waiting for somebody to ask. In fact, the kids who act out are basically using not the most sophisticated way, but definitely effective way to get your attention. They basically say, look at me, I'm hurting, I want to talk about it, but you're not listening, you're not asking. So I'm going to disrupt what's going on here. And they do that, and they do get the attention. And if it's attention that is trauma-informed, it will completely de-escalate it. If it's an attention that is not trauma-informed, it's of course leading to more of this acting out behavior. So it's very hard to, David and I know we run also a trauma clinic that when we train our new clinicians, they said, I don't feel comfortable yet. They don't know me yet well, that I don't know if I would like to talk about the trauma. Maybe it's too much. Maybe they will fall apart. Maybe they don't want to tell me. And we always tell them, if you delay it, they know that you are not ready and capable of hearing, because they came here because they want to hear, to be heard. And the student is making you know that they are hurting and they want to be heard. So asking them is going to do exactly the opposite. And it's counterintuitive, and it makes sense that it's counterintuitive. And it makes sense for you to think they will fall apart, but it is actually not. It's going to do exactly the opposite.
Yes, and they don't keep crying forever. We've never seen a child that just cried forever. They will cry for a little bit and then they'll be consoled. There are some exceptions. I've seen a couple where the child did cry a long time. So yes, that can happen, but that's not the norm. Most of the time, if you ask the child, if you simply ask the child, so are you worried about anything? And they start to cry because they are, um, yes, they will cry and then console them. And if they want to talk to the school social worker or a para or some other person, or talk to you in a break, that's all a human interaction. It will not last. And believe me, if you have your class shed some tears in September, you will be having a much better December and January and February and March. And those tears don't go away simply by not having them shed. So, get some extra Kleenex and have the kids cry. It's amazing in our culture how crying has become viewed as somewhat anxiety provoking for people. It's people are kind of almost afraid of people kind of breaking down and crying. And there's nothing wrong with crying. In fact, it's appropriate because people have things to cry about. And if our culture tolerated that a little bit more, and I don't mean just letting everyone just give up and be disabled. That actually comes about by not allowing people to express themselves. But a little bit more emotional tolerance would be helpful. And there's nowhere that would be most helpful than in a classroom. So it will not become a flood of tears, believe me. So.
And I think that the question was particularly referring to falling apart, like as if something will happen that the child will not be able to be put together afterwards. That is, I would say, I would think it's extremely rare, if at all. Because those kids are very thirsty for this attention from an adult who is willing to listen and to care for them openly, not to solve their problems.
Yeah. All right, I think we have time for one more question.
What role does social media play in our fear of crying and self-expression?
That's really an interesting question. On the one hand, social media has greatly provided avenues of expression for kids, for all of us, hugely compared to, I grew up in the 50s and there was no venue for any of this thing. You could write a letter, you could talk to your friends. There was nothing interactive. There was no community. It's just such a different world. And there's so much availability for creative outlets, for poetry, for speaking, for creative expression, this kind of a thing. That's a positive. Negative, of course, is all of the really negative, demeaning, horrible content that you can see. I think that there's the issue of kids are exposed to the world that we never were exposed to before. So building a unique identity now is so hard because you see every idea that you might have had has already been done 1,000 times more, and it's on all over the place on the web. So it just seems like how could I be an individual with my own unique characteristics when I see so much examples of these other things. So the sense of anonymity and smallness there, as well as the kind of the I'm going to put my website or my blog or my creative thing out there and try to get a lot of followers and I'll become famous. So there's a lot going on with social media. In terms of the impact on emotional expression, to me, I think it's more terrorism, war, school shootings. There's nothing like a school shooting to make people feel like, let's not upset anybody here. We don't want to get anyone upset because they might come into the school with a gun. So I think that there is a much more kind of anxiety in the world that there was from before about people, being mentally ill, losing it, and just going crazy and killing people. That kind of makes us really interested in emotional regulation. The emotion. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say one. I know that we coming to an end here, but I think that actually what worries me about the social media is that there isn't enough practice of a person-to-person interaction. There is this mediator, which is a screen that is not responsive with the facial expression, with the body temperature and the presence, and that actually highlights even more the importance of practicing at school. So it will be a contrast to this anonymity and lack of personhood in the social media, for good and bad.
Yeah.
And
No,
particularly
kind of a disembodied emotional expression. And this is something which the pandemic, of course, and the remote learning has really impacted our students over the last 2 years, which we're now trying to catch up, a little bit here. It's been a major problem. I think that's a really great question. I think that would be a really interesting study to look at the impact of the different aspects of social media on emotional expression and people's fear of it. So whoever asked that question, should go get a grant and do a study on that one, because that's really interesting, I think. All right, well, we've come to the end of our time. Our next webinar is going to be in a month on February 8th, same time, Tuesday at 4 p.m. It's going to be a wonderful one. It's going to be an experiential workshop on stress relief and self-care for you guys. It's going to be run by our two intrepid drama therapists at the Miss Kendra program, Erin Webb and Alicia Stephen. They're going to be running it on February 8th. We very much would like you to come, enjoy the mindfulness and exercises for stress relief, taking a moment to pause and self-reflect. And we encourage you to come. Thank you so much for coming today. And
David, what about the flyer for the teacher support group?
Oh, and then, yes, and then we were going to, Dr. Lubin is going to be running a teacher support group. Do you want to say something about that, Hadar?
Well, I think that we are out of time, but I just, if we have the flyer, you can put it, Jillian, but if not, we're going to meet once a month for an hour. We've done it last year for teachers, just to have a place where you can talk about those things and have a chance of other teachers to have this discussion with myself and Erin, who will be joining me this year.
And the way to, I think we have sent out the with the newsletter to all of you information about the teacher support group with the contact information on how you can. Here we go. There we are. And if you get down to the contact information, it's Hadar Lubin at sbcglobal.net, and just email Hadar, who will be running the group. Hadar did this last year, and we had a wonderful group that met for a number of months, and we would encourage you to think about it for this year. It's a small time commitment, but can be very beneficial. So anyway, thank you all very much, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.